In the stillness of the forest, Aragorn and Legolas stood opposite each other, their breaths visible in the crisp air. The campfire crackled faintly in the distance, but the warmth it offered felt meaningless now. Neither spoke a word. There was nothing left to say. The silence between them was louder than any accusation, their bond hanging by a thread. Aragorn moved first, drawing Andúril in a single fluid motion. The blade gleamed in the sunlight, its weight seeming heavier than ever. Legolas responded in kind, his bow already drawn, the string taut as the arrow's tip gleamed like frost. For a heartbeat they froze, reading each other's movements. Then, Legolas released. The arrow flew fast and true, but Aragorn twisted, the shaft grazing his cloak and embedding itself into a tree behind him. In an instant, Aragorn surged forward, Andúril sweeping in a powerful arc. Legolas abandoned his bow and drew his twin knives, the blades ringing as they clashed against the ranger's sword. The force of Aragorn's strike pushed him back a step, but Legolas recovered swiftly, slashing upward to force Aragorn to retreat. Their fight was ferocious and silent, steel meeting steel with a rhythm as precise as a deadly dance. Aragorn's strikes were heavy, each one designed to overwhelm, while Legolas's counters were swift and precise, aimed at exploiting even the smallest opening. Aragorn swung for Legolas's midsection, but the elf spun, evading the blade with a grace that defied mortal limits. He retaliated with a series of rapid strikes. Aragorn parried, his movements deliberate and measured, refusing to be drawn into Legolas's speed. Legolas leaped onto a fallen tree, gaining the high ground as he rained down a flurry of attacks. Aragorn countered by shifting his stance, stepping inside Legolas's reach and delivering a powerful shove that sent the elf tumbling to the ground. But Legolas rolled with the impact, springing back to his feet in an instant. He launched himself at Aragorn, his blade spinning in a blur of motion. Aragorn blocked the first strike, deflected the second, but the third sliced a shallow cut along his arm. The ranger barely flinched, using the momentum to drive Legolas back with a powerful downward slash. The elf leaped aside, the blade carving a deep gouge into the earth where he had stood. Neither relented, neither spoke. The only sound was the clash of steel and the heavy breathing of two warriors who knew each other's strengths and weaknesses. Each movement was a statement, each strike a question unspoken. In the silence of their battle, one truth became clear. This was no sparring match. This was a fight for dominance, for trust, for something neither could put into words. But the day was far from over. Suddenly, Legolas disengaged, leaping backward and flipping into the shadow of a low-hanging branch. Aragorn advanced, his boots crunching against the forest floor, but the elf used the momentary reprieve to somersault into a clearing, reclaiming his bow in a single fluid motion. Before Aragorn could react, Legolas had drawn and loosed an arrow, the string snapping with a sound as sharp as the arrow's point. Aragorn barely raised Andúril in time, deflecting the missile with the flat of his blade. Legolas was relentless. Another arrow followed, and another, each forcing Aragorn to move, to defend, to give ground. With every step back Aragorn took, Legolas gained confidence, his precision and speed proving too much for the ranger's slower, more deliberate movements. Aragorn narrowed his eyes, waiting for an opening. Legolas fired again, this time aiming for Aragorn's leg. The ranger dodged, but the arrow grazed his thigh, drawing blood. Aragorn grunted, his stance faltering for a split second, and Legolas seized the opportunity. With an uncanny burst of speed, Legolas shot twice more in rapid succession. The first arrow struck Aragorn's vambrace, knocking his arm aside, and the second arrow buried itself into the ground just inches from his boot. A warning shot. Legolas didn't stop. He fired again, the arrow aimed deliberately at Aragorn's sword arm. This time, Aragorn sidestepped, but the elf had already closed the gap. With a single leap, Legolas landed behind Aragorn, striking with the hilt of his bow to knock him off balance. Aragorn stumbled but caught himself, twisting to meet the elf's next attack. Legolas was faster. He slammed the bow into Aragorn's wrist, forcing Andúril to fall from his grasp. The ranger reached for his dagger, but Legolas spun, driving the tip of an arrow to Aragorn's throat before he could draw it. The two froze, their breaths heavy and ragged. Aragorn's eyes burned with defiance, but Legolas's aim was steady, unyielding. For a moment, the clearing was silent, save for their breathing. Aragorn glanced at the arrow tip, so close he could feel its sharpness against his skin. Legolas held his ground, his voice unspoken but clear said, "Yield."